When it comes to Kentucky basketball, I like to live by 3 different rules. Play defense without fouling, never take a mid-range jumper over a 3, and don't lose to toothpaste.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Colgate Raiders. Going to be breaking down this matchup. I think it should be pretty easy. 9 out of 10 doctors will recommend this podcast to you. Thank you guys so much for watching on today's episode. If you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can continue your season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if they win their first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball taking on the Colgate Raiders. As we normally do, we're going to break down the positives. What do we know about Colgate? What do we know about toothpaste? And what do they do well outside of clean your teeth? Also, going to be breaking down the negatives. Where do they struggle? That's kind of where we're going to start in our conversation in the second segment, kind of being like, okay, Kentucky should take advantage of all of these things, but will they? And then to wrap up the show, I want to kind of put this non-conference schedule that Kentucky has had, and I expect them to have, kind of put it into perspective. So, to start off here, we'll discuss the head coach of the Colgate Raiders, and he has been there for quite some time. He's actually been there since the 2011-12 season, and that is Matt Langlois. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. It's either that or Matt Langlois. I've heard people say both, but Langlois is 229 and 191 during his time with Colgate. That's a 54.5% win percentage. The big thing about Colgate, and it's in stark contrast to how they have started this year, which is just really disappointing and underwhelming. Toothpaste has gone to what is going on 5 straight NCAA tournament appearances. They are seeking their 6th straight tournament appearance this season. And that is looking to end. That streak is looking to end this year because the Raiders are currently 2-8. 2-8. Not off to a hot start. They are really struggling on both sides of the ball underneath Langlois, and I think it's mostly due to the fact that they don't have a ton of experience, which again we'll get into, but the positives here. Langlois has shown the ability to change his coaching philosophy up. There was a stretch there during his time with the Raiders where he was getting to the NCAA tournament with some high-octane tempo offenses. Then they started to try and slow things down a little bit. They got a little bit better on defense, but overall, they have struggled, I think, these past 2 seasons to kind of replicate that, and he's had to adjust on the fly. He still had a 25-win season last year. He was 26-9 the year prior. He has not won an NCAA tournament game yet, or at least not won in the round of 64, but they are looking to try and do that at some point in the near future. Again, it's probably not going to happen this year because they've already started 2-8. They're projected to go 12-19 according to KenPom. What do they do well? It's going to kind of be a little bit of a short list here, unfortunately. They played Syracuse very close earlier this year, and frankly, that's probably the biggest positive, is they've played a number of teams close, and they hit 10 threes against the Orange there. They played Syracuse close, they played Harvard close, they played Sam Houston State close, and they just lost by 3 points to Northeastern on the road. So they played a bunch of teams hovering around 100 to 200 on KenPom. 250, I should say, on KenPom. They themselves ranked 274th. And they have yet to kind of break through against any of them. And a lot of it, frankly, I think has to do with what they're doing on the defensive side of the ball because they're not in these games where they get up and they perform well. They're not like doing a ton poorly offensively. Like they're making threes, they're doing stuff well in transition. Like they're not a horrible team I think they've just had a little bit of bad luck, and also they're very inexperienced. Very inexperienced. But the positive here, and the thing that you need to look out here for today, if you're watching this on Wednesday, do they play Kentucky close, especially considering the fact that Kentucky is coming off of that win against Gonzaga? I don't know if Kentucky is going to have a little bit of a slump like they did possibly against Georgia State. Who knows? We'll have to see. Western Kentucky was also a little bit of a slump game. I really don't see that happening, frankly, in this contest. But if you're going to point out an area that Colgate could execute, it's the fact that they've played some teams close and they've got a really good head coach, I believe. 2-8, unfortunately, is not the start that you want. If you want to look at some of like the deep analytics as far as like their rebounding percentages and their free throw stuff, they do a good job of not allowing a ton of second chance points. They themselves don't turn the ball over a ton. They prevent teams from getting to the foul line. There's not a ton of fouls being called in their games, period. And they've played a pretty solid strength of schedule. I mean, that's really all that I can say positively about Colgate so far. And they've got some individual players, like a couple that give me pause. And we'll break those guys down. We'll kind of see what could possibly be a matchup issue. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. Kentucky being down possibly both point guards in this game, I don't see them really struggling because of that. And we'll kind of get into more detail there in just a moment. Before I do that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can tackle the NFL action right now with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives them everything they need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I really appreciate you guys doing so. If you have not, go ahead, please join up. For anybody out there that has any questions, any comments about possibly what Kentucky basketball could be doing in the coming days, whether it be against Louisville, whether it be against Colgate, whether it be against Ohio State, you can leave all those questions in the YouTube comments below. At Locked On UK on Twitter also is where you can find me. Apologies, just had a random application open up on my computer and it was blaring very loudly. Hopefully none of y'all heard that. So we talked about the positives as best we could. Good head coach and a relatively inexperienced team that's been close in some contests. Now let's get to the bad stuff. Their defense is bad. Their defense is pretty bad. And it's not necessarily in terms of points per game, but it's really in terms of efficiencies. They play one of the slowest paces. They play with a very slow pace, one of the slowest in the country. And so you're not going to get a ton of points out of some of their games, especially considering they've not played a ton of really fast opponents either. But they are giving up a ton in terms of percentages at the rim in both from three. You know how Kentucky has been in a three-point shooting slump. Here is the matchup. Colgate is 322nd, yikes. 322 in opponent three-point percentage. Opponents are shooting 37.3% from behind the arc. I expect Kentucky to get to that number. That is where the conversation starts and ends. They do not play efficiently on defense. If you go and watch that Syracuse game, yes, they lost 74-72, and Syracuse only scored 74. But, man, Syracuse was able to do a lot against Colgate in terms of inside-out stuff. It's just a matter of whether or not Kentucky hits. I expect them to hit at home. I expect them to come out of it. They have to rebound at some point. I don't mean physically rebound the ball. I mean rebound shooting the basketball. It has to happen at some point. It cannot just continue for no reason. 37.3% is where this starts and ends. Opponents also shoot almost 55% at the rim. That's really bad. That's really bad. And Kentucky shooting 59.3%, which is 18th nationally. This team is going to pick you apart, Colgate, on the defensive end of the floor. They're going to destroy you scoring. That's what I expect Kentucky to do in this game, to score a lot of points. How many exactly we'll get to in a minute whenever I give my final score prediction, but man, they cannot play defense. They don't turn opponents over. They don't do a phenomenal job rebounding the ball. I know I said that if you're looking at positives earlier, that could be one, but it's really not that great of a statistic. It just stands out compared to the rest of the really poor ones. They don't block shots. Opponents shoot very well from the foul line. They don't create a lot of non-steal turnovers, hardly any at all. Teams just kind of do what they will in terms of distributing, getting assists. Teams get a decent portion of their points from three, which is interesting. Again, teams are shooting well. Kentucky should shoot well. They should score in this game. Offensively, they are 11th worst in the country in offensive rebound percentage. They don't grab boards. Their effective field goal percentage is almost in the 200s. They don't shoot well. They are in the bottom third nationally in three-point shooting. They are average in two-point shooting. They're one of the worst teams in the country in block percentage. They get swatted a ton. They shoot very poorly from the foul line. I mean, there is not a whole lot to look at here in terms of positives. I mean, they're just all around. And from an analytics standpoint, they don't do anything well. And that's kind of what scares me at the end of the day, because it's not all about numbers. You go and watch that team. They fought hard against Syracuse. They fought hard against Northeastern. But they haven't been able to pull it out. And to be honest with you, Kentucky, I think, just has a physicality and a finesse advantage in this game. I think they're just going to be faster. Syracuse won by being faster. You're going to see Kentucky get out in this game explosive in transition, I think is what you're going to see. In the half court, I think you're going to see Kentucky move them around a lot to get open threes. I think they're going to get that, unless Colgate really wants to focus on what's happening beyond the arc, which by all means, do it against a Mark Pope team that will carve you up inside the paint. If you don't believe me, go watch the second half of that Gonzaga game. You are going to score points, Kentucky. You're going to score points, and I think you're going to win the game. I think this will be a blowout. I don't think it's going to be particularly close. Their leading scorer, Brady Cummins, is really solid. He's really the only guy that I'm looking at, a 6'6" junior wing type player, shooting 38% from three, 52% from inside the arc. Outside of shooting, he doesn't really do much well. It doesn't really impact the game, rather, I should say, in a variety of ways. Their 6'11" forward, Jeff Woodward, was kind of like who they ran their offense through, but he's hurt. He's out. He's been out for weeks. So they're down a man, and their guys are just not shooting and collectively playing very well. And again, they're young. They're playing a lot of sophomore and freshman type players. I'm curious to see if they can hold together for 40 minutes against Kentucky. Jalen Cox, a sophomore, is your lead guard here. Even if Butler doesn't play, I don't have concerns. He turns the ball over a ton. I put this in my notes here as well. All of their lead guards are turnover prone. Every single one of them. Jalen Cox, 22.2% turnover rate. Parker Jones, 19.8% turnover rate. Cummins, who will start at the three if I'm not mistaken. He's also got a 14.7% turnover rate, just a 12% assist rate. Nicholas Louis Jacques, I believe it, or Jacques, I don't know how you say it. 12.5% assist or turnover rate. I mean, a lot of guys on the roster have a negative assist to turnover ratio, at least in terms of percentages. I believe Kentucky's favored by 30.5 in this game. 90-62 is what KenPom says. I don't think Kentucky holds them to 62 just because I think of garbage time stuff that happens at the end. So 65, 67 points. Let's say 67. I think Kentucky gets close to 100. I'm going to say 97-67. This game should not be close. Should not be close. If this game is close heading into Louisville, we may have some concerns. Maybe some. But this should be 8 up. All right, before we wrap up the show, I want to kind of put some of this into perspective for you guys. Maybe just kind of talk about where Kentucky's at, because the reality of the situation is Kentucky is playing probably as good as you could have possibly asked them to, with a new head coach and a completely new roster. And they have a very good opportunity to close out this non-conference schedule very strong. I mean, like, very, very strongly. Before we kind of go into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Omaha Steaks. Nothing quite delivers comfort and joy like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide over at omahasteaks.com, plus score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. They've got legendary steaks, mouth-watering desserts, and more. You can save 50% site-wide, again, for a limited time at omahasteaks.com, plus our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and earn an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. omahasteaks.com. $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, wrapping up the Tuesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. So, I think Kentucky's going to win. I think they're going to beat Colgate. They only score 67 points per game. I think they're going to hit that average. They don't really stop much of anything. All of their lead guards are turnover prone. The numbers say negative things. And here's like real quick before we put things into perspective. Here is an interesting note that I came across. So pace of play is really important, right, when it comes to Kentucky. It's important for Colgate as well, just because of how slow they try and make things go in all of their games. They try and slow things down. They have only played one game that had a pace rating, or just a pace over on KenPom, of 75 or higher. That's the fastest game they played, 75. Kentucky's played like over half their games over 75. And every single game that they've played over a 75 pace, they've scored at least 87 points. Kentucky should score a ton in this one. Inefficient defense. You're gonna rack it up the speed in this one. Ratchet up the speed. You should win comfortably. I hope they win comfortably. Paper says they should. Okay, perspective. Guys, let's be realistic here. Kentucky is currently the 9th best team in the country, according to KenPom. They're really good. They have already beaten number 3 Duke and number 4 Gonzaga, both away from home. It does not get much better than that. It doesn't. You have a blemish against Clemson. You lose by 4. Okay. That was a horrible game that you played. You play that game again, you're going to win. I'm so confident in that. You have 2 massive quad 1 wins. Massive quad 1 wins. And you're going to have another on Saturday, December 21st against Ohio State. If you are able to beat Colgate, to beat Louisville, to beat Ohio State, and to beat Brown, which, to be clear, you're projected to beat all of them, you will enter SEC play 12-1. 12-1. You're going to be a top 5 team. You're going to have a ton of momentum. And the blessing that the SEC schedule makers have presented to you is the opportunity to play the Florida Gators just once this season and in Rupp Arena. That is after the Brown game. You will open SEC play January 4th in Rupp Arena that Saturday. This game tipping, by the way, at 11 a.m. Eastern. You better get up for it. Florida, currently right now, number 8 in the nation, 9-0, undefeated. And they play really, really well on both sides of the ball. They have one of the best offenses in the nation. They destroy at the rim. They're really, really good in transition as well. It's a really, really good team that Todd Golden has. They're deep. They're tall. This will be just a major gunfight in Rupp. 12-1. If you were able to get to 13-1, you got 3 quad 1 wins. Kentucky only had, or at that point, you'll have 4. Kentucky last year only had 6. So many opportunities to win some really big time games this year. So many opportunities. Build some momentum heading into Florida. You have the opportunity to do it. I think Kentucky will. And the reality for you guys that I wanted to put things in perspective. This is a new team with a new head coach. They are still trying to learn how to play together. They're 8-1 with 2 wins over 2 of the best teams in the nation. The ceiling, to me, has not been met. You've got time. You absolutely have time to make things work, to get healthy if Kerr Kriisa is able to come back. There is so much to be excited about right now if you're a Kentucky fan. Let's just hope that they're able to keep their foot on the gas. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_. And you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.